Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Fakhr Imam, Chairman, Kashmir Committee, General Khalid Jafri, Honorable Sufi Saab, Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most important aspect of the whole crisis that we are facing. Humanitarian aspect, which perhaps has been mentioned by all the speakers, but I think this is one subject which deserves to be looked into in depth, so that the sufferings of the Kashmiri people are brought to the fore, the awareness is created, and the pressure is brought upon the Indians to lessen the sufferings and at least give them the freedom of movement, freedom of communication with their kith and kins all over the world. On August 5th, at midnight local time, the disputed territory was abruptly cut off from all communication, both within and outside the world and within Kashmir, as India snapped internet and phone connections and shut down all Kashmiri television channels. A strict curfew was imposed across Kashmir. During the previous week, an additional 180,000 troops had been moved into Kashmir to join the roughly 750,000 troops already deployed in the area. And on August 6th, the Indian Home Minister announced that India was revoking Article 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution, which gave Kashmir some limited autonomy and restricted outsiders from buying land in the state. There are many other reasons to be concerned about India's action of 5th August, but the international community needs to take special notice of the signal it sent to the world of the blatant and unapologetic authoritarian nature of the present Indian government, which has been growing steadily in various states of India. It is so reminiscent of how the fascists operated to override all opposition to the seizure of other territories, that it announces an authoritarian arrogance that must be called out for what it is. Modi's unilateral action reminds us of Hitler's takeover of Czechoslovakia or Mussolini's takeover of Libya, Ethiopia, or Putin's takeover of Crimea. I think it is clear that the latest arrival on the authoritarian stage is India, and the so-called world's largest democracy is just a cover for a new authoritarian state. Under the new dispensation, Kashmir is to be ruled directly from Delhi as its union territory. The last time Kashmir was ruled directly from Delhi, from 1990 to 1996, it witnessed human rights violations on a massive scale, with extrajudicial killings, torture, rape, disappearances, firing on unarmed demonstrators, burning of homes, crops and standing harvests, and a complete clampdown on all political activity. The warning signs that this will be repeated are already loud and clear. Though very little news is escaping from the military cordon laid down by India around Kashmir, there are reports of mass arrests, including of young children, a near total clampdown on freedom of movement within Kashmir, and Indian military forces opening fire on protesters with live ammunition, tear gas, and pellet guns. Pellet guns are an Indian invention designed specially for non-lethal crowd control and used only in Kashmir. The bullets explode like shrapnel on impact and have been responsible for blinding hundreds of Kashmiri young men. Those Kashmiris who have gone abroad and have left their families in Kashmir are worried because they do not have any linkages with them. There are no telephone connections and they do not know whether they are living or they are dead. Hospitals are turning the patients away due to the absence of doctors and non-availability of medicines. Indian police in Kashmir refuses to register the cases of civilians killed in custodial killings. The security forces barge into the houses during the midnight raids, and there have been cases of harassments of women folk. The long and dismal record of Indian human rights abuses in Kashmir had until now been routinely ignored by the outside world, but now the narrative has changed. Media outlets across North America, Europe and Middle East, Asia and Latin America either report from the ground or pick up news as it appears in the independent media. They show images of desolate streets ringed with gleaming new concertina barbed wire and bristling with checkpoints, and children injured and blinded by Indian troops firing pellet guns and even using catapults, and doctors and patients trying to reach the hospitals turned away by the soldiers at checkpoints. And an independent Indian news outlet interviewed a young woman who was forced by Indian soldiers to walk 6 kilometers while she was in labor to reach a hospital where she could deliver her baby. There seems to be no limit to the cruelty with which Indian troops treat the Kashmiri civilians. There has been a trickle of news of Hindu nationalist violence against the minorities and Dalits in India that Western media is no longer able to ignore. Perhaps the true colors of the Hindu nationalist government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was rehabilitated by Obama because he had been refused the visa and entry during the Condoleezza Rice period. And perhaps this is something that this man has been encouraged to go ahead with all sorts of brutalities. A combination of emerging geopolitical factors has enabled the Western and US media to get in touch with their conscience. Insightful reporting and editorials are making front page headlines, and even Human Rights Watch has broken years of silence on the issue to warn India, quite rightly, to step back in Kashmir. In 2017, The Rafter Foundation of Norway awarded its prestigious annual prize of two Kashmiri human rights defenders, Praveen Ahangar of the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons and Parvez Amroz of the Jammu and Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society. In 2018, the UN Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights issued its first ever report on Kashmir and a follow-up report in June 2019. Reports from Jammu and Kashmir on torture and Amnesty International on arbitrary detentions, that is the arrest without warrants, without charges, added to the growing evidence of massive human rights abuses by the Indians. The Turkish media is also providing a lot of coverage. They have picked up the story with sustained reporting. The other aspect of the Western media coverage on the current crisis has been the near total blockade on all Kashmiri media and reports of Kashmiri journalists being attacked by the Indian troops on the checkposts. While some independent Indian media sources have been reporting on the situation in a courageous and principled way, the majority of the Indian media is traveling freely around Kashmir in army vehicles and helicopters, repeat the Indian government's lies about the peace and normalcy in the valley. Kashmiri journalist Gohar Gilani, who was able to access an internet connection after nearly 2 weeks, sent out this message, said Kashmir will remember the instrument of tyranny, especially those who raised a toast to celebrate, to mock at Kashmir's collective humility, helplessness, unprecedented information blockade, crackdown and mass arrests. History shall never forget this shameful propaganda. There are no confirmed reports about the number of troops which had been inducted, but it is said that something like 180,000 troops were inducted, and thereafter people were arrested, and perhaps the number of arrested people has gone up to about 10,000, and reports of torture are also surfacing. The UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights has issued a statement calling on the Indian government to end communications clampdown and expressing concern about the reports of arrest and torture. In the context of human rights violations and atrocities perpetrated by the Indian occupation forces, the High Commissioner referred to the various reports issued by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the International People's Tribunal on Human Rights and Justice in Kashmir. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders expressed concern over the current conditions in Kashmir, terming it unacceptable. Several countries, including the United States, Britain, Iran, and even OIC, have expressed concern over the prolonged security curbs in Jammu and Kashmir. Even European Union Foreign Policy Chief Mr. Mogherini has expressed concern and stressed on the need to restore the rights of the people, their freedom, and their communications. There have been popular protests around the world with global peace activists supporting the Kashmiri right to self-determination. Along with the media, this represents a significant shift in the global narrative on Kashmir. At the same time, the government of Pakistan should now work hard to create awareness amongst the international community and urge them to intervene to stop bloodshed of the innocent and defenseless Kashmiris. While highlighting large-scale human rights violations, Pakistan should demand from UN to appoint special rapporteur with the mandate to investigate and report on crimes against humanity in Kashmir. This would be the first step in setting up a credible mechanism for documentation, accountability, and justice for human rights abuses in Kashmir over the past 3 decades. This should also include the extrajudicial executions, torture, gendered and sexualized violence, enforced disappearances, and unknown, unmarked mass graves. We should also mobilize the international opinion for appointment of a UN Commission of Inquiry with the mandate to investigate all instances of human rights violations, which will be again another good step for the accountability of those who have been perpetrating criminal activities in Kashmir. The 2 leading alerts on genocide watch today are Kashmir and Assam. Minority groups like the Sikhs and Nagas, with their own histories of suffering, repression, and violence at the hands of the Indian state, are watching events in Kashmir closely, and what they foretell. The long night of Indian fascism has just begun. At this critical juncture of our history, when the events have provided us an opportunity to serve the Kashmir cause, we must realize that the time is running out of our hand. A humanitarian crisis, a tragedy of large size, is shaping up in Indian Kashmir. And we cannot sit idle, we cannot ignore what all is happening there. And that is where I think our diplomatic activity is to be enhanced. There is a competition between India and Pakistan of narratives. There is a competition of diplomatic activity. You have seen that the Indian Prime Minister and others, they have been reaching out to the international leadership. And that propaganda is to be countered, because India is preventing passage of information to the international community and the institutions. And because of that, many countries that do not know much about the atrocities and much about what all is happening in Kashmir. If we lose time and wait for United Nations General Assembly sessions and other events to come, I think by then most of the people in Kashmir would have gone through those atrocities, and perhaps the tragedy would have shaped the way it is now shaping. There is a threshold of tolerance, there is a limit that the people can tolerate, and if ultimately we see lot many casualties there and a lot of bloodshed and genocide, and at that time if the international community starts reacting, that may be too late. So that way I think there is very little at the moment that has already been done. So the international opinion has to be mobilized so that the pressure is brought upon the Indian government and the situation is reversed, and international observers or the United Nations observers are allowed to move in, and at least they should be able to relieve that pressure from the population in Kashmir. If we delay these actions, then I feel sorry to say that the tragedy would have already taken its shape, and we may regret thereafter. Thank you very much.